will be addressing in a few cases are the key points. When did future foreign fighters decide to leave? What was the means of transportation to the battlefield? Who financed travel? What networks were involved? Did they encounter any difficulties on traveling or upon arrival? And lastly, but most importantly, did they actually recruit other people? My first case is Hossein El-Wasaki. He was a key member of Sharia for Belgium. I'm at slide 3 now. I'm pretty sure it's following up. After Fouad Belkacem was arrested, the leader of Sharia for Belgium, he was one of the main figures to leave for Syria. He wanted to join Al-Qaeda or Jabhat al-Nusra at that time, but he had no tazkiyah. Nobody could give him any reliable background. He didn't have any knowledge of Arabic, but he managed to join Majlis Shurat al-Mujahideen, led by the Al-Absi brothers. And he started recruiting via social media, basically via Facebook, Twitter, and what have you. And he was so successful in basically recruiting people that he ended up as the Emir of the Muhajirin in Majlis Shurat al-Mujahideen. If we look at the next slide, there's a slightly different case. This guy, who was very militant on Twitter, he ended up as a shepherd, basically, as a goat shepherd. The day before they left, he left in a group. They had a party with at least eight other people in Brussels. They took a flight to Turkey. They were transported to a cave. That's what I was told, at the border of Turkey. There they were at a certain night after the cave got full of foreign fighters from different countries, not only Belgium, but also a lot of Caucasian fighters and from all over the world, basically. They were picked up by trucks. When they reached the border of Syria, the driver of the first truck got out and he paid the Turkish gendarme with a shitload of money. I don't know how much exactly, but basically there was a bribe going on. Then when he eventually reached Syria, he faced multiple difficulties. At first he joined a training camp. He was kicked out because he was being deemed unfit. And then he said being a shepherd in the Islamic State is better than having a high position in Dar al-Kufr. In the end, he was basically killed by the Islamic State themselves. Then the other slide shows us a bunch of women standing in front of a white BMW with a French license plate. These women took their car from France and basically drove all the way to Syria. But those things had consequences as well. If we look at the next slide, we can see, for example, marked in blue, one of the attackers of the Paris attacks, who drove his car all the way from France to Syria, and he got fined for basically importing the car. That's the important thing to say about this. Here's another example of a Belgian fighter who rented the BMW in Belgium and drove all the way through Europe, the Balkans, all the way through Turkey to Syria. And then we have the recruitment via social media. As soon as these guys arrived in Syria, they started recruiting people. And at a certain point, Western media deemed it appropriate to title these things as being that ISIS was recruiting young girls and boys using jars of Nutella and pictures of kittens. And you can see two examples right here. You can even see right behind the Belgian fighter holding the jar of Nutella that they even had la vache qui rit. So they had everything they wanted, and they were wanting to show the whole world that life was a beauty. This was the period of time they called the 5-star jihad. And it was really successful. We don't have any figures confirming how many people were recruited via social media, but it must have been a very big deal of people that eventually ended up in Syria through the recruitment of these Belgian fighters. If we look, for example, at the Paris attacks, we know that most of them went to Syria via Turkey overland. Once they arrived in Syria, they were recruited in a local, let's say a local group, Katibat al-Batar al-Libya. Most of these Belgian fighters spoke a dialect that was reasonably applicable to the ones used in Libya. And eventually Katibat al-Batar al-Libya ended up as being the main network behind the attacks in Paris. All of these guys used fake passports. Salah Abdeslam, one of the survivors of the attacks, he misused or abused the migrant crisis in Europe in 2015, and he actually managed to recruit a lot of these guys overland. They were transported from Hungary, Croatia, and go on overland via rented cars to Belgium. Once they arrived in Belgium, because they were from criminal networks, they had the knowledge on where to find weapons and safe houses and cars. So they used their previous colleagues in crime to basically get a hold of all this stuff. This is not unique. It happened a lot during the migration crisis, and my estimate is that this might be happening again at some point. And thereby I conclude my presentation for this moment.